The telephone rang in the St. Paul police station at 3 o'clock in the morning. A man's voice, high-pitched and trembling, spoke through sobs. "There is a girl hurt there." He gave an address, then the line went dead. When officers arrived, they found her barely conscious, her skull fractured, blood pooling on the frozen ground. The caller had not been a witness. He had been the one who struck her. But why would a man telephone the authorities to report his own crime? Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this. Now, let's begin. It was New Year's Eve in the year 1980. The city of St. Paul, Minnesota, lay beneath a blanket of winter snow. The air was bitter, sharp with cold, and the streets were quiet, save for the distant sound of celebration. Church bells would soon ring in the new year. Inside warm parlors, families gathered. Outside, the wind carried the scent of wood smoke and the promise of ice. In the early hours of the first day of January, 1981, a young woman named Karen Patak made her way through the darkened streets. She was 21 years of age. The night was cold. Her breath formed clouds in the frozen air. She did not know that she was being followed. She did not know that before dawn she would be found lying in the snow, her head injuries so severe that physicians would later marvel she had survived at all. But it was the telephone call that would haunt investigators for years to come. A man, weeping, his voice breaking with what seemed to be genuine remorse, had directed police to the scene of his own attack. It was the first time they would hear that voice. It would not be the last. Who was the man who wept as he confessed? Paul Michael Stephani was born on the 8th day of September in the year 1944 in the town of Austin, Minnesota. He was the second of 10 children born into a Catholic family. His early years were marked by hardship. When he was but 3 years of age, his mother remarried. The man who became his stepfather was known to be cruel. It was said that he would beat the children in his care. Witnesses reported that he would sometimes throw them down the stairs of their modest home. The household was one of fear. Paul grew into a tall man, unremarkable in appearance. Those who knew him described him as quiet, capable of holding employment, capable of maintaining the appearance of normalcy. He married a woman named Beverly Leader. They had a daughter together, but the marriage did not endure. The couple soon divorced. The reasons were not widely known. Throughout the 1970s, Stefani moved through various positions of employment. He worked as a janitor. He worked in manufacturing. In the year 1977, he was dismissed from his position at the Malmberg Manufacturing Company. The reasons for his dismissal were not recorded. He found other work. He lived in an apartment. He walked the streets of Minneapolis and St. Paul like any other man. But there were signs, small and easily overlooked, that something was not right. Those who lived with him, who knew him in passing, would later recall moments of strangeness, a sudden shift in demeanor, an unexplained absence, a darkness that seemed to settle over him without warning. By the winter of 1980, Paul Stephani was 36 years old. He lived alone. He frequented taverns and public houses in the Twin Cities area. He was seen in establishments where working women gathered. He was polite. He was unremarkable. No one suspected what lay beneath the surface. On the final night of December 1980, he encountered Karen Patak. The circumstances of their meeting were never fully established. What is known is that before the night ended, he had beaten her severely. What is known is that he then walked to a telephone and called the police to report what he had done. The attack on Karen Patak did not lead to an arrest. The police had only a voice, distorted by weeping, recorded on their equipment. The young woman survived, though her injuries were grave. She could provide little information. The investigation reached no conclusion. The case remained open. The months passed. On the 3rd day of June, in the year 1981, a young woman named Kimberly Compton traveled from her home in Pepin, Wisconsin, to the neighboring city of Minneapolis. She was 18 years of age. She was a student. She had her entire life before her. By the following morning, she would be dead. Stefani encountered her in the streets of Minneapolis. The precise location of their meeting was never established. What followed was recorded only through his own confession. He stabbed her with an ice pick. The weapon was small, easily concealed, capable of inflicting terrible wounds. When it was over, he left her body where it lay. Then, as before, he went to a telephone. At 3 o'clock in the morning, police received a call. The voice was the same, high-pitched, trembling, breaking with what sounded like genuine anguish. "God damn, will you find me? I just stabbed somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop myself. I keep killing somebody." 2 days later, he telephoned again. He was sorry, he said, for stabbing Compton. He would turn himself in. But he did not. On the 6th of June, he called to complain that newspaper accounts of the murder were inaccurate. On the 11th of June, in a voice barely coherent, he wept into the telephone. "I'm sorry for what I did to Compton." The police were now certain they were dealing with a killer who felt compelled to confess. But the voice was distorted by emotion. It was high-pitched, almost feminine in its quality. Identifying the speaker seemed impossible. They had recordings, they had his words, but they did not have him. The summer passed. The investigation continued. Officers listened to the recordings again and again. They sought patterns. They interviewed witnesses. They found nothing. In the autumn, there was another victim. Kathleen Greening was found dead in her bathtub at her residence in Roseville, just outside St. Paul. Stefani would later confess to drowning her, but this time there was no telephone call. The weeping voice was silent. The silence did not last. On the 15th day of July, in the year 1982, a woman named Barbara Simons met Paul Stephani at a public house called the Hexagon Bar, located on the Minneapolis side of the Mississippi River. She was 40 years of age. She worked as a nurse. She was known to be kind, responsible, dedicated to her profession. The two spoke at the bar. Stefani asked her for a cigarette. She gave him one. They continued talking throughout the evening. When the time came to leave, Simons told a waitress who worked at the establishment, "He's cute. I hope he's nice, since he's giving me a ride home." Those were among the last words she would speak. The following morning, Barbara Simons was found dead. She had been stabbed. The wounds numbered 40 in total. The attack had been frenzied, brutal, sustained. The location was near the river. The police were called. The scene was examined. Evidence was collected and catalogued. The victim was identified through items found on her person. Then the telephone rang at police headquarters. The voice was familiar. Officers recognized it immediately. It was the same voice that had called after the murder of Kimberly Compton. The same high-pitched, weeping tone. "Please don't talk, just listen," the caller said. "I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one over in St. Paul." For the first time, the killer had connected two of his crimes in a single telephone call. The police now understood they were dealing with a serial killer. They had his voice. They had his confessions. They had descriptions from witnesses at the Hexagon Bar who had seen Simons leave with a man. But still, They did not have a name. They did not have a face. The community was gripped with fear. Women were warned to exercise caution. The newspapers reported on the crimes. The killer who wept became known to the public. Some called him the Weepy-Voiced Killer. Others simply called him the Weepy-Voiced Man. The recordings were analyzed by experts. The police worked tirelessly. But summer turned to autumn, and still, Paul Stephani walked free. It would take one more attack, one more victim, before his identity would finally be known. The investigation into the murders had produced recordings of significant value. The telephone calls made by the killer had been preserved. Experts in voice analysis examined them carefully. The caller's voice was high-pitched, almost falsetto in quality. It trembled with emotion. The weeping appeared genuine, not performed. This suggested a man who experienced genuine remorse, yet continued to kill regardless. The medical examinations of the victims revealed a pattern. Kimberly Compton had been stabbed with an ice pick, a small weapon capable of deep penetration. Barbara Simons had been stabbed 40 times, the wounds inflicted with what was believed to be a similar implement. Kathleen Greening had been drowned in her bathtub, a different method entirely, though Stefani would later confess to this crime as well. Karen Potak had been beaten about the head with tremendous force, suffering severe brain injury. The attacks showed no consistent pattern in method, but all demonstrated extreme violence. The victims were women, ranging in age from 18 to 40 years. Some were encountered in public establishments, others in circumstances that remained unclear. The geographic locations were confined to the Minneapolis and St. Paul area, cities separated only by the Mississippi River. Physical evidence from the scenes was limited. In the case of Barbara Simons, witnesses at the Hexagon Bar provided descriptions of the man who had left with her. He was described as tall, unremarkable in appearance. The waitress who had spoken with Simons recalled her final words about hoping he would be nice. This testimony would later prove valuable. The police continued their work throughout the summer of 1982. They reviewed the recordings. They interviewed potential witnesses. They searched for connections between the victims. The investigation was thorough, methodical, following established procedures. But the identity of the killer remained unknown. If you're finding this case as compelling as we are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue researching and sharing these forgotten stories from history. We also read every comment, so let us know your thoughts on this case below. Now, let's continue. On the 21st day of August, 1982, Paul Stephani encountered a 19-year-old woman named Denise Williams in the city of Minneapolis. She worked as a woman of the streets. He offered her a ride. She accepted. But as they drove, Williams sensed something was wrong. Stefani was not taking her back to the city as promised. Instead, he drove through darkened suburban areas, onto roads that grew increasingly isolated. When he turned onto a dead-end road, she knew she was in grave danger. Stefani attacked Williams with a screwdriver, stabbing her 15 times. But Williams fought back with extraordinary courage. During the assault, she managed to grasp a glass bottle and struck Stefani on the head and face, causing him to bleed profusely. Her screams drew the attention of a man who lived nearby. He rushed to her aid and began to wrestle with Stefani, who then fled the scene on foot. The neighbor telephoned for an ambulance. Williams survived. She was able to provide police with a description of her attacker. She described his vehicle. She described his appearance. She had seen his face clearly. Stefani returned to his apartment, but his injuries were severe. He was bleeding badly from the cuts Williams had inflicted. He required medical attention. He sought help at a hospital. It was this decision that led to his capture. When medical staff treated his wounds, they found the injuries consistent with defensive wounds from an assault. The police were notified. The description matched the man who had attacked Denise Williams. Paul Michael Stephani was arrested. The connection was made immediately. Further investigative work linked him to the murder of Barbara Simons. Witnesses from the Hexagon Bar identified him as the man who had left with her that night. The trial for the murder of Barbara Simons took place in 1983. The prosecution presented its evidence methodically. The waitress from the Hexagon Bar testified that she had seen Stefani with Simons on the night of her death. Denise Williams testified about her attack and identified Stefani as her assailant. Medical experts testified about the wounds found on both victims, but the most compelling evidence came from those who knew Stefani personally. His former wife, Beverly Lyder, took the stand. His sister testified as well. A woman who had lived with him also gave evidence. All three stated that they believed the voice on the recordings, the hysterical, weeping voice that had confessed to the murders, belonged to Paul Stephani. The voice alone was not sufficient for identification, as the emotional distortion made certainty impossible. But combined with all other evidence, the case against Stefani was overwhelming. The jury deliberated. They found Paul Michael Stephani guilty of the murder of Barbara Simons. They found him guilty of the attempted murder of Denise Williams. The judge pronounced sentence: 58 years in prison. Stefani showed no emotion as the verdict was read. Paul Stephani was remanded to prison to serve his sentence. For more than a decade, he remained incarcerated, maintaining his silence about the full extent of his crimes. The murders of Kimberly Compton and Kathleen Greening remained officially unsolved. The attack on Karen Potak remained unlinked to him in any formal sense. He had been convicted only of the crimes for which direct evidence existed. In the year 1997, Stefani was diagnosed with skin cancer. The physicians informed him that he had less than a year to live. Facing his own mortality, he made a decision that would finally bring closure to the families of his victims. He decided to confess. He confessed to the beating of Karen Potak in 1980. He confessed to the stabbing death of Kimberly Compton in 1981. He confessed to drowning Kathleen Greening in 1982. He confessed to the stabbing death of Barbara Simons in 1982. He confessed to the attack on Denise Williams in 1982. The confession regarding Kathleen Greening came as a particular surprise to investigators. Stefani had not even been considered a suspect in her death. Unlike his other crimes, he had made no telephone call to report it. The police had no reason to connect him to her drowning. Yet he confessed nonetheless, providing details that only the killer could have known. In total, Paul Stephani had killed 3 women and severely injured 2 others. The youngest victim, Kimberly Compton, had been only 18 years of age. The eldest, Barbara Simons, had been 40. All had been going about their ordinary lives when they encountered him. All had died or suffered because of a man who seemed, in his telephone calls at least, to genuinely regret what he was doing. The case raised questions that were never satisfactorily answered. Why did Stefani telephone the police to confess? Was his remorse genuine, or was it part of some deeper compulsion? Experts in criminal psychology studied the recordings. They noted that serial killers rarely exhibit such behavior. Most do not contact authorities voluntarily. Most do not weep as they confess. Yet Stefani did both, again and again. On the 12th day of June, in the year 1998, Paul Michael Stephani died in Oak Park Heights Prison, Oak Park Heights, Minnesota. He was 53 years of age. The skin cancer had taken him, as the physicians had predicted it would. He was buried without ceremony. The recordings of his telephone calls remain in police archives. His voice, high-pitched and breaking with sobs, is preserved for posterity. It serves as a reminder that evil can wear many faces, can speak in many voices, even voices that weep.